Through the symbols, we may be able to form a bridge to the unconscious part of the psyche. The collective unconscious works to make the ego aware of aspects of the personality that have either stalled over time or were never in the field of awareness. Through the use of symbols, the unconscious serves as a compensating factor to reestablish the flow of the libido towards a new goal or purpose. Fantasies and dreams are the primary ways for this reestablishment to take place, by way of symbol production and other elaborate manners. These fantasy and dream contents produced by the collective unconscious, those which have fascinated the psyche for all of history, are the same that produce stories of myth and religion, which have permeated the world for thousands of years. For the individual, the dreams and fantasies point towards an understanding of what has been ignored previously, or what is yet to come in life. They provide one with a sense of myth in their own life. The unconscious challenges the ego and makes man confront himself and his inner demons. Just as the hero must confront similar challenges and foes in myths of old, the only way to move past the neurotic condition and gain a new life, or rebirth, is by slaying the dragon within, by fighting with oneself to win oneself. The unconscious is initially seen as the enemy and a thing we least want to experience due to the way it reveals our darkest attributes. But if the battle is accepted and the enemy is overcome, it becomes our ally and friend, aiding us towards bigger and better goals. The hero takes a piece of the dragon that he fights, and it becomes his armor for future battles. Myths tell us that the impulse to sacrifice comes from the unconscious. This is to be understood in the sense that regression is inimical to life and disrupts the instinctual foundations of the personality, and is consequently followed by a compensatory reaction, taking the form of violent suppression and elimination of incompatible tendencies. Within the psyche, there are autonomous forces guiding one towards a meeting with the unconscious, attempting to produce the hero that has been hidden from view. These forces are part of the natural instincts of man, which have existed since our inception, forces that have tried to keep us on a path towards our higher being. One of the primary ways to get in touch with the natural instincts is through some sort of religious experience, a religio, or a linking back to the original experience. The archetypes of the collective unconscious are these guiding forces, which help facilitate the linking back process. These inherited ways of being, these imprints on the psyche, are the bearers of symbols and the guiding forces which direct the conscious mind by way of illumination or revelation. The archetypes are the driving forces of our libido, whether we know it or not, and they are what directs an individual towards certain ways of life. They come in all sorts and shapes, and are best known in the personifications of the anima animus, the shadow, the wise old man, and the self. Although they can be beneficent, the neurotic must be careful in getting acquainted with the archetypes, as they can also create a truly dangerous psychic imbalance. When one becomes possessed by the archetypes, or strongly identifies with them, it can lead to a sense of inflated ego. The numinous nature of the archetypes causes one to believe he is the archetype, or that he possesses its powers, when in fact he has only caught a glimpse of its possibilities and does not realize that these entities are shared by all of mankind's ancestry. Raving prophets, religious fanatics, and megalomaniacs can be awakened when one identifies too heavily with the archetype and is unable to maintain a stable and separate ego consciousness. But when the ego is able to form a healthy understanding of the archetypes, these contents often serve as intermediary guides between the individual and the collective unconscious, working to shape the thinking, feeling, and behaviors of the neurotic, so that he can begin to formulate a new way of living. One could say that the archetypes help to guide one towards his given destiny. The human mind possesses general and typical modes of functioning which correspond to the biological pattern of behavior. These pre-existent innate patterns, the archetypes, can easily produce in the most widely differing individuals ideas or combinations of ideas that are practically identical, and for whose origin no individual experience can be made responsible. The archetypes are felt as numinous, as they are bearers of the God image, or imago Dei. This image of God can be viewed as a complex of unconscious archetypal ideas and images, which are normally projected onto objects outside of one's own self. The way that one comes into contact with these archetypes and the God image is through introversion and a subsequent dropping of personal projections. The way we project ideals, hatred, jealousy, anger, and criticism onto others is what prevents us from having true experience with these unifying forces. But once the projections are out of the way, the only place for them to go is back to one's own self. Hence the difficulty in realizing we are not what we thought we were, and there is much work left to do to become a whole person. These experiences can be felt as illuminating, earth-shattering, life-renewing, as if one had experienced contact with God. When one has an experience of God, they are in fact having a direct connection with the nature of the collective unconscious, and the worship of God can be seen as a worship of the inner psychic forces and libido. Hints of the divine come in actuality from realization that one's own psyche shares in a part of the divine. But before this experience can have a lasting effect on the individual, he must endure the greatest of challenges, an extinguishing of personal attachments. Whoever conquers this monster wins to eternal youth, but to this end, defying all danger, he must descend into the belly of the monster, the journey to hell, and sojourn there for some time, the night sea imprisonment. If the flood does not come, it may mean instead that a sacrifice is required, but this can prove often a very difficult task at a critical juncture. This is always a painful process for the hero, as it means departing from what he is accustomed to, what is part of his everyday life, what he finds most valuable and cherished, as opposed to ritualistic sacrifice in which one rids themselves of animals or external objects. Oftentimes the heroic sacrifice means the relinquishment of something within oneself, something that is felt as part of one being. But for all the heartache that comes with this process, the one who is required to enact the sacrifice is an end, deemed the hero. During the act, the hero sees himself not only as a sacrificer, but also as a sacrificed. This is so because although he has ridden himself of concepts or objects on a voluntary basis, it can also be felt as somewhat involuntary, due to the influence of the collective unconscious. The process is essentially a synthesis of decision between conscious and unconscious, hence the painful experience joined with the hope for a prosperous outcome. This act means relinquishment of past and present achievements for the future goal of wholeness. If the sacrifice is successful, then it can have a revivifying effect on the individual, preparing him for future battles. Sacrifice brings with it a plenitude of power that is equal to the power of the gods. Even as the world is created by sacrifice, by renouncing the personal tie to childhood, so, according to the teachings of the Upanishads, will be created the new state of man, which can be described as immortal. Following the sacrifice, the hero must pass through numerous trials on his road towards the treasure hard to attain, or the elixir of life. Snakes and dragons are common motifs for guardians of the treasure that is sought after by the hero. The overcoming of these dangerous creatures means overcoming oneself, realizing one's own shortcomings, and dealing with the shadow aspect of the personality. It is an attempt to come to terms with the collective unconscious, while also realizing the limitations of one's willpower and the need for assistance from within. Another form of danger is when one must descend into the belly of the beast with only himself to depend on, in hopes to somehow escape victorious. Until these unconscious contents are met and dealt with, one cannot move towards the life that has always been hoped for and sought for. These dangers have taken many a hostage, meaning that the individual may develop a psychosis or other debilitating mental condition. Many a man has lost his mind and gone mad when toiling with these threats. The perils of the unconscious are not to be taken lightly, and although it is possible that one will perish on the journey, if he comes out alive, he will be able to possess the goal he has worked so hard for, the treasure hard to attain, or in other words, one's own self. In the darkness of the unconscious, a treasure lies hidden, the same treasure hard to attain, which in our text, and many other places too, is described as the shining pearl, or to quote Paracelsus, as the mystery by which is meant a fascinosum par excellence. Following the regression of libido, the meeting with the mother, the descent into the unconscious, the guidance by the archetypes, the completion of sacrifices and floods, the battle with dragons, and the attainment of the goal, the hero has all along been led through a period of rapid growth and change in personality, one that far exceeds the changes that occur in everyday man. The hero is likely being prepared for a role in which he was previously not adapted due to his infantilism. But through these experiences, he has become molded for the time when he will be needed to act on the world stage. The extreme succession of growth and flourishing is symbolized by spiritual rebirth, a second birth, the birth of the hero. Ultimately, the libido has been transformed and renewed onto a higher spiritual plane, and it acts through the once neurotic individual, giving him a new zest. In myths of old, the hero who has overcome the challenge is depicted as possessing attributes of fire and the sun. They were the holders of the flame, containers of the spark of life that lit the world. The sun symbolizes the fire that is established within the soul of man after his journey, the spirit that has been reignited. It also symbolizes the rising out of the dark and unconscious state of Psyche, and the subsequent raising into illumination and greater consciousness. When he finally attains the treasure, he realizes the whole time he was looking for himself. He was trying to obtain the inner spirit that had been halted along with the libido. He realizes that his life and the person he has always wanted to be was the aim of the entire journey. The journey has been completed, and transformation of libido and personality has taken place. The sun comparison tells us over and over again that the dynamic of the gods is psychic energy. This is our immortality, the link through which man feels inextinguishably one with the continuity of life. The life of the psyche is the life of mankind. Welling up from the depths of the unconscious, its springs gush forth from the root of the whole human race, since the individual is, biologically speaking, only a twig broken off from the mother and transplanted.